Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming back to this session. And I also would like to thank the people which are connected online through Zoom. So it is a blended roundtable, this one, because we will have people here at the Congress and other people which are participating also from quite far countries. So it is a pleasure to introduce this roundtable. The roundtable is organized in the framework of the 17th meeting of the working group, Biological and Integrated Control of Plant Pathogens. We had already some really interesting sessions. Until now, we had 5 interesting sessions with in total 150 presentations during these 4 days. Okay, and we thought with the scientific committee that we would like to organize a roundtable in order to focus on the difficulties and on the opportunities represented by the registration of biopesticides. So this afternoon we will have 5 people, 4 participants moderated by Gianfranco Romanazzi that will introduce to the topic and represent different point of views from the policy to the company producers, from the farmers to the networking and opportunities for research. So I leave the word to Gianfranco for starting this roundtable. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks Davide Spadaro, Monica Mezzalama, Vladimiro Guarnaccia, and all the other members of the organizing committee and all the scientific committee for this very, very interesting meeting. We had a lot of talks that are linked to the subject of this roundtable because there is a lot of research behind, and there is the bottleneck. Bottleneck is a word from Monica. So we had to try to stress all together. And before to start, I would start with the frame in which, with the pool in which all of us are navigating. And thanks to all the people that are joining from different countries. So good morning from the people from Mexico, and good evening for the people that are following from Eastern Asia. And we know that we have to leave a better world to the new generations. So we have to be sustainable. Although the risk is that we make the world sustainable also for pests and pathogens that take a benefit of this overall sustainability. And we try to adopt this SDG in EU with the farm to fork strategy. We know that there is, we don't know which is the stage, so we can discuss about, and we will hear soon later the voice of the European Commission. We know that it was fixed that we have half the loss and waste, and a big portion is due to post-harvest disease, and botrytis cinerea is a very important post-harvest disease. Just one pathogen can do such much damage. And we have to do halving the amount of synthetic pesticide. Actually, this is already occurring because there is a transition, there is an evolution toward green. And we will hear now later where it will take on. And we have to increase the organic agriculture that is perceived by European consumer are more safe. But there is the high risk about synthetic pesticides. Statistics tells that yeah, we do a lot of survey, but the number of irregular samples on EU is around 1%, more or less. So basically, what we eat is pretty safe. The Europe, somebody tells that is the place of the world where the quality of the food is higher because the registration is pretty strict. But it is strict also to place molecule on the market, as we heard, and also because consumers are sensitive to the pesticide, maybe because they don't know that. And retailers try to make profit on this, try to scare the consumer and attract them, telling to provide food with a reduced risk. So this make even harder the situation for the growers. Most of those are from Germany, but also the Italian ones are not different. So basically, there is a kind of worldwide competition on us that are customer. So they don't know what they do not. For them, it's not enough the MLR, that is the standard. It is a coefficient of 100% of safety for us, but they want a liquid, so 1/3, half of LMR, and they also require a top number of residues. That is sometimes 5, 4, 3. That means all insecticide, fungicide, herbicide, whatever is applied on the crop. But to register synthetic pesticides is pretty costly. And not to see that they work. Most of those expenses is to demonstrate that they do not harm. So you see $300 billion or euro, and this increase. So I think that the bar now is beyond the 300. And this kind of feeling that is against the synthetic pesticide take the industry not investing on the new molecules. So if you see the mechanism of action, I counted in the more or less in the middle, so in 90, 20 different mechanism of action of fungicides that they was developed in that decade. In the last one are 10, so half of them. And we have also a straight reduction of the number of new components. And you can see this is a US level. And what about EU? In EU, there is this situation. This is from Patrice Marchand from ETAB in a recent webinar. You can see that in 2014, we had 30 new active ingredients. More than half were synthetic compounds, but we had also biocontrol solution and the first basic substances. Then it decreased, it was a shift. The number of chemical active ingredients decreased. But if you see that after 2019, we don't have any new synthetic pesticide. While we have a long list of synthetic pesticides that were phased out. And also the overall solutions moved from 30 to less than 10. And this, I think, will become hard and hard to manage pathogen and pest. There is the cost, but there is also the time to be sure that they do not danger us, they do not harm us. We need 10, and now it's around 13 years to place on the market a new compound. So we will see, and we will hear here later the proposal for a shortening of this period. And last slide, not all synthetic pesticides are the same. So we have the low-risk active ingredients. There are not so many. They need to be re-registered every 15 years, and they are coming on the market, but let's say slowly. And when we calculate the amount of this indicator, HR1, about the quantity of synthetic pesticide, the weight of this is 1. Then we have the majority of compounds, around 300, 350, and we have to multiply the applied compound per 8. Then we have the candidate substitution. We have to multiply per 16, and we heard the other day about tebuconazole is a candidate substitution for the monilinia is very important. And we have the provisional authorization of compounds that are not anymore on the market or not yet on the market. And here the multiplier 64. So not all the compounds are the same. And out of this box, there are so-called basic substances. And about this, I will tell you something later. But now let's start with the first panelist, Domenico Desario, European Commission.
Thank you very much for the presentation and good afternoon. I'm Domenico Desario. I'm a policy officer at the European Commission and I work in access to market of pesticides, in particular biocontrol active substances. And my presentation will be today presenting you, first of all, a short introduction to our legal framework. Then I will describe our activities already undergone about fostering access to market of biocontrol substances. And last but not least, of course, how we intend to carry on these activities. So to take a pesticides on the market, whatever the pesticide is, chemical, synthetic chemicals, or biological, we need, first of all, the active substance to be approved at European level. The EU approval, of course, is triggered upon the submission of a dossier. And in order to have an active substance approved at European level, it's very important to specify that the applicant has always to demonstrate at least one safe use in a representative formulation. So there is a submission of two dossiers, one for the active substance, one for the representative use. When the active substance is eventually approved at European level, we can then eventually authorize the plant protection product at member state level. And of course, there is a need of one authorization for each of the use, even of the same formulation. Just to give you also an overview about how the workflow of the process works, this is an example of how this process works for the approval of the active substances. Everything starts when an application is submitted by an applicant. So a dossier is submitted according to implementing regulations called data requirements. So which tell the applicant which information should go in the dossier. This dossier is submitted then to a rapporteur member state. So the risk assessment starts in this very exact point. And the rapporteur member state performs the risk assessment according to other implementing regulations, which are called uniform principle for the evaluation, and submits then, after this first assessment, an evaluation to EFSA. So this assessment dossier is submitted to the European Food Safety Authority that still peer review risk assessment, so together with the other member states, in order to produce at the end of the risk assessment process an EFSA conclusion. The EFSA conclusion is what we, risk managers, so the European Commission, we receive in order to take a decision within the Standing Committee on Plant, Animal, Food and Feed on whether the active substance is should go for approval or non-approval eventually. And this works equally also for biocontrol active substances, of course. I would like to show you some couple of slides with a couple of numbers, first of all. So if we see here, this slide shows the trend of applications of new active substances in the last years. We see that more or less the trend is fluctuating, but more or less staying quite stable. But what we can clearly observe is that there is a decrease of application concerning active substances which are synthetical, so the light blue bar at the top. But this reduction is compensated somehow by the increase of application which are concerning biological active substances. If we break down this data even further, we see in this slide that the availability of biocontrol active substances in the EU year by year is clearly increasing. So we see that now in 2024, we have over 180 substances which would fall under the definition of biocontrol, even if we don't have yet a definition officially speaking, but the trend is very clear. On this slide, we also see very clearly that among the different groups of biocontrol active substances, the most abundant part is represented by microorganisms, so which is the bar at the bottom of this chart. Microorganisms are also most of the times approved as a low-risk substances, so the approval period is longer, and are fully eligible to be used in organic farming. And this is why we decided to give priority to microorganisms as regard our activities to facilitate access to market of biocontrol substances. So we started these activities on microorganisms in 2018, 2019, that ended up in publication of guidance documents in 2020 and 21 on the first one on metabolites of concern, the second one on antimicrobial resistance. But the breakthrough was reached in November 2022 with the entering into force of new regulations, so the new data requirements and decision-making criteria for microorganisms, which made the regulation more fit for purpose and updated to the latest science. More recently, March 2023, we published 2 communications from the Commission, which are listing recommended test methods and guidance documents, which would be needed to fulfill these data requirements. So this is just a recommendation, I'm not obliged, but it's a recommendation. In October 2023, we published another guidance document, which we called explanatory notes. This document is a very lengthy document that explains more in detail the new data requirements that entered into force in November 2022. Do not worry, the last slide contains all the links to this guidance document in case you want to have access to. But now other activities are, of course, ongoing. We are cooperating at the OECD level, for instance, in developing new test methods for microbes, because most of the times applicants now have to use methods which are employed for chemical substances because of lack of methods which are developed for microbes. So we are working at OECD level on that. And also we are performing some systematic reviews to help, which delivery would eventually help applicants for future submission of dossier. And we are producing also other non-regulatory elements like guidance documents such as the one on viruses. But I said we give priority to microorganisms doesn't mean we worked only on that. We are also working on other type of other biocontrol active substances. In particular, in 2024, we amended the already existing guidance document on semiochemicals, so we're talking about pheromones, by extending the scope of the previous existing version of this guidance to other pheromones beyond the SCLP group, so the straight-chain lepidopteran pheromones. We also have produced another document still in January 2024 called the problem formulation that helps applicants and risk assessors to understand which data requirements may be eventually waived based on certain particular condition. And this is very important, especially for innovative substances like RNAi or peptides. Of course, we face continuous challenges as a regulator. And one of the most important challenges is that everything is a moving target. So we saw today a lot of science going on, and everything will be moving in the future. So we have new technologies coming in the pipeline, bacteriophages, RNAi, peptides. What we can say is that our regulatory framework is flexible enough to embrace this diversity. We have in our data requirements, so the implementing regulation telling the applicants which data shall be provided, we have a separation between the Part A and Part B. Part B is specific on microbes. Part A is for everything else which is chemical, which includes also biological control. And indeed, in case the biological control still needs to be assessed based on Part A, applicants can use this introductory point 1.5 and the document I mentioned before, the problem formulation, to lighten the set of data requirements to be produced, because maybe for like pheromones are surely less persistent than a certain nasty whatever chemical. So applicant can waive this certain specific data requirement based on this justification. Of course, we need to develop more experience if we want to be more specific in the regulation for this specific new innovation like peptides, for instance. Other challenges might come from also well-known group of biological control substances like microorganisms. The new regulation, the new data requirements that entered into force in November 2022 let consortia of microorganisms be subject of a single application, so as a single active substance in a unique dossier. This is a good possibility because having more consortia, as we saw today, to the market can lead to product with more efficacy, lower possibility of targeting, of having pest resistance occurrence, but of course lead to other challenges like how do we assess them, because it's more complex, of course. We are now discussing this within the EU biopesticide working group, which next meeting is Monday and Tuesday, and we will discuss about this too, by the way. But what is the future of biocontrol in Europe? This is what we have been doing so far. What is in the plan for the future? You might have read already the Commission communication, A Vision for Agriculture and Food, which is basically following up from the Farm to Fork strategy, which is explicitly committing in addressing some of the bottlenecks, which are now slowing down the access to market of biocontrol. In particular, the need of having a faster risk assessment for these substances, the need of having more relevant experts assessing these substances, and more resources, in particular as regard EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, that will be provided most probably with a lot of resources in order to speed up the assessment of biological substances. But how making this in practice? As also explained in the communication Vision for Agriculture, there will be a so-called simplification package proposed by the Commission by the end of this year. And this package will propose targeted amendment of Regulation 11/7/2009, so the regulation that regulates the access to market of pesticides. For biocontrol, we are committing to introduce a definition and also other things like provisional authorization, fast-track procedure. Of course, now are ideas that will need to be developed, and we need to see what the Council and the European Parliament will say about it. There are other ideas under discussion. I'll be happy to take your question, but time is running out. So here is a slide with the link. I don't know if this will be circulated. That would be very useful eventually. And I give the floor back to the chair. Thank you very much.
For this very nice point of overview by the regulation on. Then for the people that wants to take the questions, please do. The people that are here in the room, they have the number and they can go through while. Slide. Okay, thank you. The people that are in the room will have the dedicated number so they can take the question with the WhatsApp, and while the people that are following online can include the question in the chat of Zoom, and we will read and we will also later. So we saw the frame. Now we see we need the company that turns the research in a formulation that is available for the growers. So thanks, Jennifer Lewis, Executive Director of IBMA, to show us the point of view of companies.
Thank you very much, Gianfranco, and thank you for the invitation to talk here. And thank you, Domenico, for a great introduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges to the biocontrol industry. Oh no, I hear you say it's going to be industry moaning. Actually, it's not going to be industry moaning, because we have this wonderful opportunity, because politically, through all the work that's been done by a huge number of people in the Commission, in Parliament, farmers, we actually now have this statement in the vision about a wish to move forward with biocontrol in form of a fast track and a definition. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and about some of the evidence behind why it's important and why it's challenging here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what you all as researchers can do to help to move this forward. So a little bit of background to start with. So who are the International Biocontrol Manufacturers Association? I think it was David who asked me in one of the coffee breaks, well, how many members do you have? Well, we have about 200 members globally, about 60% of them are in Europe. We have about 140 actual producers of biocontrol, and they can range from very large biocontrol companies of 500 million, like Copper Biobest. They can be multinationals of multi-billion, like Syngenta or Bayer, who are switching to biocontrol gradually, but they have to learn how to do it and have the products. So they're important members. And then we have a huge number of startups. So people who've taken the sort of products that you have and the sort of ideas that you have and turning them into a company. And they're desperate to get onto the market, because they have investors that are giving them money, lending them money, and they want a return on that investment. And some of the timescales are quite long for that. We also operate in Africa in terms of national groups. We have 10 national groups throughout Europe and Africa, and we work with members in other countries as well. And our goal is to actually have faster and more fit for purpose regulation for biocontrol worldwide. We collaborate with many people in order to try and demonstrate biocontrol and that it is a reality. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the plant protection products that are biocontrol. So that's the things like the microbials, the semiochemicals, and the natural substances, which may be plant extracts, they may be peptides, they could be proteins, they can be a number of items, but also those that are regulated completely differently, which is the macrobials. I was asked to talk about regulatory timelines around the world. And I think the first point is that they vary a lot. And there are many reasons for that variation. It can be that the whole structure of the regulation is different. It can be the complexities. It can be the number of people that they've put onto the regulatory frameworks. And perhaps a good example here is Brazil, where they were pretty slow. I can honestly say 10 years ago, Brazil were pretty slow. About 10 years to get 7 to 10 years to get something through. They actually made a decision that they were going to create a national strategy for bio inputs, they called it. So it's biologicals generally. They resourced their ministry differently, and they restructured the way some of their existing regulations worked. They also had a huge need from a farmer perspective of new modes of action because they were having such terrible resistance in some of the big arable crops. As a result of that, there's been exponential market growth. They've actually ended up doing a completely new regulation for all biologicals, and it only takes 1 to 2 years to get your product through. When you look perhaps at, we can compare the US and the EU, because they are quite different in terms of what they do. So in one case, we have a framework that is where everything is together here in Europe, whereas in the US, you actually have a desk that looks after the biologicals. And that can allow us to move quicker. Efficacy trials is another area where we don't do them, or here in Europe, we require them up front, whereas in the US, it's done while the product's on the market. And then also residues are often exempt in the US, but not here. Costs are therefore lower here in the US compared to here, and timelines are shorter. Perhaps what's interesting to look at is some of the economics of this. Several people talked about the economics. I think Neas Toshida, right in the beginning of the afternoon, talked about her frustration of some of these long timelines and the impact of them. EY, so the Ernst & Young, so one of the big accountants and consultancy firms, did a review of all this and said that the combination of the longer registration timelines, the smaller market potential, because often we're dealing with a much more specific plant protection product than one is with some of the conventional products. But we also have a lot of studies to do, so we have relatively high R&D costs relative to the small market, and all these create a lower return on investment. And in fact, they argued that the economics of biocontrol are significantly different in terms of your business model compared to conventional chemistry. And in Europe, they perceive, or they measure through all their reviews, that it's 30% lower, the return on investment, compared to the global figure. As a result of that, companies either choose not to invest in Europe, or they choose to come to Europe last, and once they've got a bit of sales and a bit of revenue coming in. Now, Domenico mentioned the vision for agriculture, and I mentioned it at the beginning. And that's come as a result of many different discussions. But there was an important report done in Europe called the Draghi report, where they actually looked at the competitiveness of Europe. And they realized that some of the regulation here is actually restricting particularly small startups. and said that they really need to do something about it. And what we see then is, as Domenico said, this proposal to go forward with a simplification package at the end of this year to create a fast track for biocontrol and a definition for biocontrol and adapt the regulation that we have, 1107, to accommodate these things. And I know that Domenico and his team are working extremely hard on trying to make this happen. So we as a manufacturers association, as their representatives, then obviously we have a view as to what it is that we need. And here is an example of what we believe is needed to really push the industry forward in these areas and create an enabling environment for us. The first is a definition which is stated clearly in the vision, and that definition for biocontrol needs to be broad enough to encompass innovation, while at the same time not being so broad as to encompass everything that there possibly is, because then we're removing that concept that actually we're working with something biological. And as IBMA, we work on the basis of identicality to nature. There are also things that can be done in terms of just improving the way 1107 is implemented. And there's a group in Europe called the Single Market Enforcement Task Force, and they've recognized that perhaps for biocontrol, the market is not as much a single market as it should be. And many of the member states have difficulty perhaps recognizing somebody else's authorization. So the principle of mutual recognition is not very well implemented. And there's a lot of work to try and improve that, although it's proving quite challenging to change that. But also priority lanes at member state level are another area that can be really implemented relatively easily. And we see some countries already doing that. We see it in France, we see it in the Netherlands. Then the next step is the targeted amendments, which Domenico mentioned. Now this is actually some change to a piece of legislation. So this has to go through the process of going to Parliament, going to Council, coming out to the Commission. I said it the wrong way around, coming out to the Commission, then going to Parliament and Council. But that can be quite a long process. So we're really hopeful to have this out at the end of this year and then to be starting to discuss it in Parliament and Council. And then the third step, which we believe is necessary sometime in the next 10 years, we should have a new regulation for biologicals based on what we see in Brazil, that they've managed to move this all forward to a certain extent with the existing regulations and making them more appropriate. Actually, when the crunch came, so when they get to a certain point, they actually need to start to address it from a biological standpoint completely. And that's what we see them doing now. But that's 7 years on from when they started to change their regulation. So here we have a lot of people working in research, which is wonderful, because if we don't start with these products and don't start with innovation, then we don't have anything. And so as an industry, we really rely on this innovation and are extremely grateful for all the work that goes on in universities to do this. One of the areas that I would suggest that we can do in the IOBC community in terms of helping to accelerate authorization and uptake of biocontrol is to provide more evidence and more practical examples of where biocontrol is helping achieve some of those sustainable development goals that Gianfranco talked about at the beginning. So we know that biocontrol maintains and enhances biodiversity, but actually measuring that and having good data on that is quite challenging. If you do a meta-analysis, you've got loads of data that tells you how some of the damage to biodiversity that happens if you're using certain conventional products. Not so much that tells you what happens if you use the alternatives. So actually having that positive information is really important. Similarly for soil health. Similarly showing how the pest and disease control is effective in a program. How do you measure an overall program in terms of its effectiveness? It's relatively easy to compare efficacy of one product beside another, but actually it's looking at it in a whole system, because now we know that we're not going to have one product we can use forever. We actually need to be integrating everything into an IPM program. and also measuring farmer profitability. Looking at that overall is really important because it's the profitability that counts. What one product versus another is not the most important bit. The most important bit is what is the profitability of your operation if you're starting to change the way you do things overall. And my last but one slide is when farmers do actually start to move to biologicals and start to work with them. Once they've kind of worked with it for a while, then our observation is people don't go back. This is an example of a livestock farmer, in fact, who's quite a well-known author, Gabe Brown. And his comment when he, over 20 years, changed his farm to having a very strict grazing regime to build the organic matter in the soil up, and also for his arable cropping. The biological life is a force, and once unleashed, it will continue to grow and generate new life. So thank you very much indeed.
And Western are already coming, so kind of green, and you may follow, and we will take them to home speakers, and you can go in the chat. And the presentation, both as PPT and the video, will get available later on the website of IOBC. But now it's going on Facebook, so it is basically available there. Then products are developed, there are the companies that produce, and there are the growers that benefit. And then Cristina Vespignani present the voice of the grower, but they have the expectation as well. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be here to share with you the point of view of farmers. Today, farmers have to face with many challenges. Beyond the plant protection, there is an increasing pressure to reduce synthetic and chemical pesticides, but are we ready to rely on biopesticides and biocontrol as main strategy? When we look at the efficacy trials of many of these products, we often see results in the range from 30 to 40% effectiveness against the target. And this is another problem because for decades we have worked with chemicals molecules considered acceptable only if they delivered at least 90% control. This gap in performance is too large for most farmers to accept. And moreover, the crop protection strategy is not the only variable. Climate change is now playing a big role in final outcomes. Climate change for us farmers means recurring spring frost, extreme rainfall in short times and in specific areas causing floods, long period of humidity with less sunlight right during critical phases like flowering or fruit set. This spring in April, we host some Indian farmers, and at the end of the day, they asked if we were in monsoon season. No, we don't have monsoon in Italy yet. Changing temperatures and evolving climate are also directly linked to easier establishment to new pathogens and invasive insects. Many of them are difficult to control with using only chemical products. Before banning chemical pesticides, we need real reliable solutions. This is not just the view of farmers, but it's shared across the food chain. The reduction in production will determine a full-blown crisis along the entire value chain. Operators are leaving agriculture. Many farmers are questioning about the future of their work. In some areas, like Ferrara and Modena, disease like Staphylococcus have driven growers to abandon peer cultivation, but many of them are also leaving agriculture. Often we don't have alternative crops for these areas, and it's difficult to switch because we don't have structure, warehouses to manage different crops. In some regions, Emilia-Romagna, Veneto, Piemonte, just to mention some, we have long promoted integrated pest management, integrated production protocols, responsible use of inputs, label compliance. We as growers and professionals want to guarantee that we put on the market is a high quality product, controlled, safe, that complies with legal limits, those AMR, that every analysis must respect. We approve the research of effective tools to help reduce chemical molecules, but we must not forget to make gradual and caution steps. When we remove chemical molecules, we may open the door to secondary pests and opportunistic pathogens, such as ubiquitous fungi or insects, grasshoppers, stink bugs, and more, usually controlled by chemical molecules common employed. The threat of destructive pathogens like branch canker, brown rot, bacterial spot caused by Xanthomonas arboricola, monilinia on flowering in apricots. These pathogens quickly cause the deterioration not only of the yield of the ear, but of the entire plant, leading to death and the eradication of all plantation and of all orchards. I'd like to share with you some real cases, like Fusicoccum amygdali, which causes destructive canker in Percoca peaches, canned peach types. Fusicoccum was once controlled by benzamidazoles fungicides, carbendazim, benomil, thiophonate methyl. Now they are all revoked, and we still don't have a good replacement. What will we need? Greater study on available products and new products, in-depth study on resistant inductors, development of an integrated strategy that brings us a considerable result, breeding programs for more resilient and tolerant varieties, including heritage cultivars. Maybe genome editing will help us to speed this process. A classic breeding programs will take more than 15 years. This determines also projects with industries like Valfrutta, Conservitalia are moving to other regions from Emilia-Romagna to Puglia to Calabria with increment of transport costs because warehouses are only in the northern part of Italy. Another key example, monilinia on stone fruit. Today, the major pillar in fitness is tebuconazole, but tebuconazole is an active substance candidate for substitution. This product is fundamental in part in mixtures, but by regulation we can use only 2 active substances candidated to substitution in a crop. Furthermore, by always using mixtures, we have an increasing of the number of active substances present on the fruit at harvest, the so-called residues. Many markets want fruit with a limited number of residues for airlines, but we often need 6 or 7 residues for some species, and it's a very limiting factor because we don't still stay in, and it's difficult. In addition, one of the basic principles of IPM, also supported by regulation, is the rotation of the molecules and active substances in order to prevent resistance development. This is a big contradiction between production and market. The case of aphids. Aphids Our insects reproduce fast and develop resistance just as quickly, and our options are very limited. In the case of aphids, mainly in stone fruits, we don't have only problems with the ear harvest, but also in the transmission of viruses like plumpox virus, that is a very big problem in Emilia-Romagna. In 2025, we had a revision of the active substances acetamiprid with new AMR and new labels. This led to many troubles about defense strategy against aphids, stink bugs, and other insects. So what happened to our protocol? We excluded acetamiprid from the pre-harvest phases, and we are including alternatives like biological products. Since 2000s, the use of sexual confusion has changed the game in the defense of in the pest management, but now after more 20 years, we would like more solutions for the other pest growers as well. Organic farming and its limits. Let's be clear, some pests and disease can be controlled biologically. Coexistence is often necessary, relying on physical protection, nets, sexual confusion, mass trapping, beneficial insects, resistance varieties. The average yields are very low, and the selling price often does not cover the higher management costs and the greater risk. The result of technical solutions are not always consistent. Microbiological or natural substances can have different effects based on the microbiome they come in contact with, and it's a growing risk. Many substances that can be used in organic farming are no longer registered by agropharmaceutical companies, but placed on the market as fertilizers, corroborants, biostimulants. These are further risk for farmers, which have to buy products. They are not subjected to systematic controls, not subject to experimental tests, but at the same selling price as chemical pesticides. Finally, we are fully agree with the replacing of the most dangerous synthetic products with biosolution and biopesticides, but we need a gradual transition guaranteeing both the protection of production and income for farmers. We need reliable and effective molecules that work even with restrictions, but with stable authorization, not be authorized year by year. The defense strategy cannot be based on emergency authorization. We need also a better farmer education about the correct use of some substances to avoid misuse. Superficial use can compromise the validity of the substance and can determine environmental pollution. And finally, when we met pharmaceutical companies, they tell us that they no longer invest in molecules but in solution. We hope that this will be real, concrete solution, because we need more than anything is to give certainty and support to our fruit growers. Thank you for your attention.
It has a review on what growers want to replace the condition producer at best. And how let's see the research which answer, research and the countries which answer can provide. Buonasera Giovanni, Refresco Net Coordinator, one of the branch.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Gianfranco and the Congress organizers to give me the opportunity to meet this community. Within Ufresco, we have not worked much on biocontrols, and I will try to explain why. So, what is Ufresco? UFRESCO is a network established in 2006 to allow networking of research project managers and research project owners, basically ministries and their agencies involved in the programming of research activities in the different countries on plant health. The objectives of UFRESCO from the beginning have been to develop plant health research policy, to optimize research, to underpin national and EU plant health policies, and to increase capacity to EU plant health science. UFRESCO received 2 rounds of funding from the European Union from 2006 until 2010, UFRESCO 1, and you can see on the slide the geographic coverage of that first ERANET project, and then UFRESCO 2 from 2011 until 2014. Since 2014, UFRESCO has developed as a self-sustained network, which means that the members have decided to continue their collaboration beyond the perfusion of EU funding. We'll see that this is not totally true, but the idea was, of course, EU funding are extremely important, but they are intermittent. Is there a way for UFRESCO to continue without that need? And as a self-sustained network, UFRESCO has changed a little bit in terms of composition, because we still have the national research funders, but we also have national plant protection organizations, which are a department in general at the same ministry of the national research funders, but slightly separated. We have policymakers, we have research institutes from academia, we have industries, and we have networks. And I like to say that today UFRESCO is a plant health research forum, a place where all these organizations try to work together, each one with their own mandate. The idea is to optimize the resources available within each organization, to exchange knowledge, expertise, to collaborate in research projects, and to nourish each other with the knowledge produced. And this is how UFRESCO has broadened geographically since 2014. So it is no longer a European stricto sensu network. And actually we are currently working on how to put the foundation for global phytosanitary research coordination. This is a EU-funded project. This is why I said that we didn't really escape from the EU perfusion, UFRESCO 3. And the idea is to develop procedures and practices for stronger national and international research coordination. So these are some examples of research projects initiated through UFRESCO. Since 2008, there have been more than 150 projects. So there are projects on horizon scanning, diagnostics, inspections, pest risk analysis. There is not much on biological control. Why this? Well, for several reasons. One is the composition of the network. Historically, the network has been composed of organizations that are official laboratories of the NPPOs, and so their main activities is linked to inspections, diagnostics, a lot of diagnostics activity, pest risk analysis. The second one is the type of research projects commissioned through EUFRESCO. In general, EUFRESCO projects are very small projects. They last 2 to maximum 3 years. And this is definitely not the best timing for developing or validating biological controls. So when Gianfranco asked me to contribute to this roundtable, we agreed that I would contact the EUFRESCO member countries to ask them about the biocontrol measures applied in the different countries, how they are successful, and what are the needs. And I did that throughout the different regions of the EUFRESCO 3 projects. So as you can imagine, the differences were very diverse and heterogeneous. From we do not have data on the use of biocontrol measures, but only data on sales, to we have a user forum and coordination of research and development activities and data packages to support regulatory decisions. So it's difficult to me to come up with a position of the network, because the network is made by its countries and its regions. So what I will share with you, it's a flavor of the diversity of EUFRESCO members' activities. So these are some of the examples of use of biocontrols. I will not tell from what countries they are, but I guess you can understand there are biocontrol agents in cottons or banana. This is definitely not something that it's a crop of European crops. These names probably speaks better to you than to me, because I'm not a biocontrol specialist. I also asked what is in the pipelines, and there was one region with very well structured in terms of research and development in biocontrol, and these are 2 biocontrol solutions that are currently testing. So Yersinia entomophaga and Brevibacillus laterosporus. What are the needs of the EUFRESCO members? So these are just a few. Invest in infrastructures to support research, facilitate a large-scale validation of new biocontrol solution, use proven organizational model for commercial development and uptake of these solutions, alignment of data requirement for registration purposes, and streamline regulatory environment. So some of them are definitely from the research side, others are more uptake and regulations. But what more? There is a clear lack of public and private partnership. There is a lack of knowledge on what's going on. There is an efficient communication to policymakers. There is a need to facilitate large-scale validation of new biocontrol solutions and to align data requirements for registration purposes. So in all this, what the role of EUFRESCO could be? So we think that there is a need for platforms that support communication and collaboration between industry, academia, and regulatory body. And this will lead to a more effective sharing of knowledge and resources, which obviously will benefit research, but will also benefit the following step. If there is communication at research level, if there is harmonization at research level, then this will be cascaded afterwards in the innovation line, let's say. We are currently working as EUFRESCO to develop the new strategic research agenda for global phytosanitary research coordination. And for sure, we will cover biocontrol because we have surveyed stakeholders from all over the world, and biocontrol is one of the priorities for the next years. But again, we come to the original problem. We want to work on biocontrols, but we do not necessarily have the organizations that can make this happen. And this is one of the reasons I'm here. I think is the right moment to take advantage of the knowledge of the IOBC community, IBMA, and other industries, and work together to take advantage of knowledge, skills, resources, and the mandate of everyone. Thank you very much.
Very number of contributors provided. Let's try to stress something about the basic substance. Those basic substances, we saw that they have no weight on the amount of synthetic pesticide that are used. So we can use whatever we want. We do not increase the amount that we use at level. Are compounds regulated by Y107? There is a dedicated article to basic substance. Are compounds that we use as food or feed, so our foodstuff basically, so they do not have, it's something that we eat. So we don't have to demonstrate that they do not harm us. So they do not have MRR, they do not have pre-harvest interval, and they need to be labeled with the name of the active ingredient, so no trade name. And usually they are approved in organic farming. So since we don't have to invest a lot for the development of those basic substances, it is cheaper. So 50,000 euro, we can have the approval, and we have also the approval in organic agriculture. And registration occurs once. So you don't have renewed registration as for the other compound. But which are the properties of those basic substances? This is the list of basic substances. Nowadays we have 28, and according to the color and to the underlining, they have different properties. So they can be fungicide, fungicide and bactericide, fungicide and insecticide, and so on. So those basic substances as a kind of dedicated approval, a simplified dossier that is based on literature, that is based on experience. So just for example, we can see the one that can be used on grapevine or on strawberry. The one of red are approved on strawberry, the one on green are approved on grapevine, or in both of them. And we can see, for example, the beer. The beer is a molluscicide. So maybe they take them and they get drunk, and so we can collect them. Or we can have the chitosan, the chitosan hydrochlorides are two different formulations, or the cow milk, like we said, the parpense, hydrogen peroxide used for decontamination of tools, or lecithin, magnesium hydroxide that we use when we eat so much. Or sodium bicarbonate that is used in the kitchen, or sodium chloride, sucrose, vinegar. Vinegar, for example, can be used as an herbicide, but not in organic agriculture, because in organic agriculture we cannot use chemical compound. And there is a list of products that are already on the market, so there is the interest of the market, although there is this key point that cannot be patented. And there is a kind of correlation, what there is in EU to what there is in the United States. For example, just one of those the chitosan in the United States is registered as grass compound. So there are multiple variables. So those grass compounds is a list. In Europe, we have just 28. These grass compounds are several thousands of compounds that can be used. And one of them that is familiar to us is chitosan. We like the shrimp, but we have the shells that are waste. So circular economy we can use, and it is used in slimming diets. So it's biopolymer and has multiple properties, so antimicrobial properties, eliciting and film forming. And we have a list of compounds that are available on the market, and they can apply the plant protection with the list of uses because they produce a film on the plant. So basically we can crush the crab shells and we can obtain a solution that produces a film and can be sprayed on the plant and produce a film that is long lasting. And recently we found that it has also an effectiveness as a volatile. That is a further mechanism of action. So it is a resistance inducer, so induce some change in the transcriptome of the plants. And we heard in the previous days about application toward downy mildew. This is another example of compound that can be applied toward downy mildew in the field alone, alterned with copper, or with half doses combined with copper. So maybe some wineries can produce a wine. This may be, I think, one of the first that is without copper in the field and without sulfur dioxide after harvest. And we tested in vineyard a list of basic substances. We don't have to go into detail, but most of them has an effectiveness toward downy mildew or powder mildew. So they have a pretty good, let's say, effectiveness, and we can just see the picture just to see the difference on the control and the plots treated with chitosan, and as well toward powder mildew there is some effectiveness. But there are also some compounds, for example, extract from Zwinglea, or there is a formulation that is similar to chitosan that is can used in combination with copper and reduce the amount of copper. So we can think that these options to reduce the amount of synthetic pesticide. Copper basically is natural, actually was natural, but now is obtained also as a derivative. And so we have a list of possibility, a list of solutions that can help the management of the main diseases and maybe to have less residues. For example, there is a very good interest toward essential oil. All essential oils have antimicrobial activity, all of them. What it changes is the concentration at which they can be used. And this almost illegible table is a summary of all proposals for application of basic substance. Why? Because we know that 28 of them were approved, but it was produced a dossier for a long list of others. For some of them, and thanks to Patrice Marchand, who set it up, some of them are in the pipeline. So they are under evaluation. So there is, as Domenico told, there is the dossier that can be approved or not, and can be asked for some clarification and so on. And just one of the examples, I just found on ChatGPT yesterday. We know that some preparations are obtained with Achillea millefolium. So Achillea millefolium was proposed as a basic substance, but didn't have all the criteria to be recognized as a basic substance. close to this, there are a list of others that may be useful. So we can tell that those basic substances can provide a contribution in plant protection, alternative or replacing some of synthetic pesticides, so they can contribute to a greener future. That's it. Thank you. And a long list of questions, but I will start from the audience. We have a round of questions to speakers, and then the speakers can try to answer. So, thanks to the one that already posted questions in the chat, we're going to take it fine, but if somebody wants to ask something, just raise the hands and the microphone. Somebody wants to break the ice? Well, wait, hold the microphone.
For the interview about the new regulation. So are there any possibility about the registration of secondary metabolites produced by microbes?
You mean for questions and then share that.
Another question that asks for legislation. Definitions. Plant beneficial microorganisms. How do we define products that go into biological control as PPPs and differences to biostimulants? Because this is the difference in the the religious story process that is very difficult for who works with microorganisms that have dual effects.
Good. What's more?
Just want to add something about the secondary metabolites, about the possibility to have a mixture of secondary metabolites, like the case of botanicals, and the problem related with toxicity.
Once more, and then we can answer. So, okay. So, let's try to give the answer to those pretty strong questions, and then let's move on with.
Okay, thanks for your questions. So secondary metabolites, that's already possible because secondary metabolites are chemical substances. Okay, so that's already possible even under the, let's say, old regulation. You mentioned the new regulation. I guess you assumed the amended data requirements, so the one that entered November 2022. That was already possible before. With the new amendment, we just clarified because we had questions like this in the past, so we thought better to clarify. So now in the introduction of the data requirements, you can really clearly see that there is a clarification on that. So if you have a chemical substance, even if it's produced by microorganisms, but then the microbe is filtered out, that's considered a chemical substance. Maybe biocontrol substances. We'll see how we go with the definition. But there should be then data requirement part A. This is a chemical substance. While if you plan to spread in the environment your microbe together with the secondary metabolite that either might be produced in the fermented batch or you foresee the production in situ, that's still data requirement part B. Because you spread in the environment a living organism. Then, of course, the risk assessment will concern also metabolite, that's for sure. Especially if you consider the metabolite as a part of the action. So you claim that there is an activity due to the metabolite. So the metabolite will be not only assessed because the microbe is potentially toxic, I don't know if it's the case, but will be assessed in terms of efficacy. On the other question on the borderline cases with plant protection product and biostimulants, we have a consistent dialogue with colleagues working on biostimulants. The rule is if there is a double function, is a plant protection product. That's the rule. So some cases it's difficult to say if a specific microbe is exerting only biostimulant activity. I know you all want that because there's a lighter regulation, but there's a different use. Some people, they prefer to go for a faster approach. Some people prefer to applicate it as a pesticide, but then you have to undergo regulation of 7%. But if the microbe or whatever substance exert both the activities, that's a block action.
So, let's move to Jennifer. Sure, several questions. So, how much it costs the registration of a new microbe EU since the beginning? That's how much it is.
Okay, thank you for the question. Will obviously depend on what we trigger in terms of the actual data requirements to go down. Can you justify not doing some things through science or not? But usually we say between 1 and 5.
Okay, and another question. What is your point of view of the second why microorganisms?
Thank you. I think that was largely answered by Domenico, actually. So there may be something that's part of the product and therefore produced by the microorganism as part of their control mechanisms, and then it's part of the microorganism. If it's extracted out and done as a sort of single entity, then it's a different discussion.
Now back to Domenico. It's based on the line. So, if there is a dedicated, let's say, path for biocontrol, it should be out of regulation of plant protection products. This was the question.
Yeah, that was also kind of used by investigation, because I know that we know ADMA also claims for. Yeah, that was also mentioned by Jennifer about the possibility in the future to have a dedicated regulatory framework for biopesticides as a product. The problem here is that the current bottlenecks we are facing are lack of resources, lack of expertise, willingness of member states to give fast track to this assessment. So if we add a separated regulation, this would not solve the problem at all. So the bottlenecks would still be the same. The resources will still be limited. On the contrary, we just would invest a lot of time, not only the Commission, but the stakeholders, the member state, the risk assessor in developing regulation with an uncertain outcome. That would be another basic act, which means that the Commission would undertake a proposal, should go for public consultation, impact assessment, and then the co-legislator, Council, and Parliament without knowing the outcome. We're already implementing 1107. Jennifer mentioned the mutual recognition, which is not used enough by member states. We are trying with this targeted amendment to enforce that point, because by using what we have in 1107 already, access to market will be extremely fast. But the problem is that we need to use resources, expertise, and really ensure that the provision of the 1107 are respected.
Thanks very much, Domenico. Yeah, absolutely. IBMA's position is we need to fix 1107 as best we can in terms of the biocontrol. And I think that's really important to get that done so we can all move forward. When we look longer term, exactly what that framework is and kind of put 2035 against it, then maybe there'll be so many biologicals, a bit like there has been in Brazil. And then we need to kind of rethink how we approach it. But right now, that's not our priority. We've got 3 steps. That's the third one. What we really want to do is get the definition, better implementation of 1107. Thanks.
Another question was about the consortium. So you have to identify this through quantity, each one is critical. So choose a regular quantity and label CL company.
Yeah, our approach with consortia, we introduced it black and white with the data requirements in 2022, but that was kind of already possible even before. And also, consortia could still be applied when you combine different active substances at plant protection product level. But we wanted to allow this at active substance level because also, as we saw this morning and this afternoon, many consortia, they work for like a synergistic effect of all the components. So it's also an efficacy issue. So that they might solve. So individual strain might not be efficacious enough to get to the approval while the consortium may. So that's why we wanted to give more, let's say, legal stability to the strain. But when we introduced the consortia possibility, the data requirement, we didn't want to be too strict. So we decided to let both natural occurring consortia and synthetic consortia to get to the market. And we didn't ask for a quantitative defined composition strain, but a qualitative defined composition strain. The only restriction is that, as it applies also for individual strain, according to the data requirement, the applicant should declare the minimum and the maximum content of the microorganism in a microbial pest control agent as manufactured, which means that also for the consortia, the applicant will need to indicate what we call the technical specification, so minimum and maximum amount, but not a specific amount.
Yeah, I think there are companies who are working on consortia, but I think it's a bit slower than individual microbials. And we see that when we sort of discuss with the Commission what next, and we see that actually there are not a huge number of companies working on it, but it's an increasing number of companies working. So I think it will become increasingly important. And it's also, I think, slightly linked to sort of differences between fertilizer product regulation and PPP regulation and how to sort of navigate that.
Okay. Another question was Christina. Another question was for Domenico about the centralization. What about long-term strategy of management at your level, are centralized, or it will be better at different piece of countries? Which is your point of view, and which may expect my outside?
Well, at the moment, let's say single market for plant protection product authorization. At the moment, that discussion is not on the table for several reasons. First of all, we have that already in the biopesticides regulation, so the pesticides are not advanced. That's centralized, and the situation is not much better in terms of access to market. Secondly, we would need to introduce this element. We would need to completely open regulation level 7. So not targeted amendment, but completely open regulation level 7. Here we are back to what I said before. So we need to go through an impact assessment. We don't know Council and Parliament what they say. Okay, with an uncertain outcome. But third, I think most important is that member state, I think, would never let it go, because the reason why there is this authorization at member state level is because, of course, there are in different member states different agronomical conditions, different pest pressures. So kind of member states have their own scientific agronomical interests to kind of compare. And it cannot deny this right, because that is subsidiarity element of regulation. So subsidiarity elements are very fundamental elements of the EU regulations that mean that basically the decision should be taken at the lowest level possible. So a scale up of the decision, so member states, European Union, is justified only if there is another body. And in this case, the member state will never let it. And this I think is stable. But as we mentioned before, if the mutual recognition would be used correctly, 120 days is enough if that would work. So if member state would implement this fast. But in the amendment of the regulation that was sent to 2009, the one which proposal will be submitted by the end of the year, we are taking to enforce the system of mutual recognition. We see it applies. So now the regulation says that member states have 120 days. If they don't respect the deadline, they are just late. But there's nothing we can do about it. But we will try to maybe make kind of recognition automatically happening after the 100 days, so that member state might be under the pressure, and if they are late, so that would be. But of course, promises to some parliament.
Thank you. And now for Jen. question was moving from farm to fork. We have to be more sustainable. We have to amount of pesticide. So we import products from different area with different regulations. So how we can deal and if we can do something.
No, that's a tricky one. Yeah, and I think perhaps I can look maybe at the organic regulation, where there was some concerns about changes in organic regulation, which if there was something got registered in Europe for pineapples or coconuts or something that's actually grown here, then it would be a problem to have it put into Europe. However, that's now been addressed with some type of requirements within organic regulation that allows you to bring things in because you've actually registered as appendix in Europe. So I think there are different things in place to try and solve that problem, depending on the regulation we're talking about. And maybe Dominica has better thoughts on it than me.
Well, no, I just agree that it's a complex issue because on one hand you have European farmers that don't want to see all these products coming to the EU, which have been treated with substances which are banned in Europe. On the other hand, consumers might be worried about what are we eating, but I just want to assure you that, of course, if a substance is banned in Europe for consumer concern, the product which is imported is subject to the same restriction. So the thing is that sometimes products can be imported if they are treated also with substances which in Europe are banned for environmental conditions. Of course, they would not endanger the European environment, not endanger consumer environment, but the problem there might be farmers. So indeed, the discussion is ongoing to try to fix this issue, but consumer protection-wise, there's no problem there. As Franco said before, the analysis on our MRL, so the maximum residue limits on products which we can buy as consumers on shelves in Europe are extremely assuring. So we're only more or less 1% of products which are just above the limits, which are already quite concerning. So if on one hand this might be some product because our regulation is very strict, on the other hand I can feel myself as a European consumer very proud that what we eat is quite safer than other things.
The different issues which is your point of view? Do you think that there is a competition with your producer that can, I don't know, alter the situation, or what do you feel about it?
Yes, sometimes growers and farmers say why we can't use this product in other areas. It's allowed and it's employed. But I think it's important. It's okay because we need to have a safe environment, a safe product, fruit or vegetable of high quality, and we can put on the market something is very controlled.
Christina, showed some data that were not discouraging, but there is room for improvement. Where you will start to try to increase the awareness of the different countries and of the policymakers about the use of, say, more sustainable solutions.
I always say that there is no transnational coordination without national coordination. And I think the problem is that the countries, there are many actors, and there is not really a coordination of their activities. In the small countries, this is happening. Countries that are well-structured is happening, but these are a few. And so obviously, when you scale this up to the international level, just at the layers, which doesn't really help. I think pretending that different people work together and coordinate their work is a little bit difficult. Maybe the first step would be that information is shared and made available. In the case of research, I mean, the European Commission is very clear at least for the public research, research data and knowledge should be made open. And if it's open, then someone will go there and will pick it and will use it, and will use it also beyond the research status. So I think knowledge sharing is the foundation.
Thank you. As audience, you have last chance to take a good questions. On the bottom, yeah, Michael. One here and the other here.
Okay, I have maybe I don't know actually what my question is, but I'm stuck with the word efficacy. When I think of efficacy of chemical compounds, I have the immediate efficacy, and for microorganisms, the efficacy might be on a longer term because they need time to establish in the soil or something. Is that somehow acknowledged in the dossier establishments?
Thank you. And then let's move into
I think we don't know. It's a very huge. Please help me.
Yeah, and I think in the dossier, what's important is showing the efficacy of the product and use it in the right way. As you rightly point out, it may need time, or it may need to be applied, and what's often the case, it needs to be applied at the beginning, before the disease is present, and on that goes down to forecasting. Most are not curative, some are, most are not. So then the whole way of thinking about your pest control changes. You can't wait to see it and then apply. It actually needs to be put into a whole program, a whole forecasting, and thinking, okay, so someone's been out and just starting from the conditions that there are, and the first sight of something coming, then it's the payment for application rather than a large amount of it present. So it's more preventative and curative. So that does change how one uses it.
yeah, and if I briefly comment, moving to biocontrol solution, it should be not the replacement one chemical with a biocontrol solution, but to rethink the whole strategy, maybe to have a different way, number of people, of timing of treatment, and even dosage as well. For any strategies, we need biocontrol strategies. But yeah, sure.
Just very briefly, I would just like to highlight what Christina said before, that here on this topic it's important to make education for farmers and consumers, because we need to adjust the expectations, not because it's the expectation should be lower down, but just should be different, because the use is different. Also, consumers should be maybe not anymore expecting really shiny apple on the shelves, but should be okay with something which is not very good looking, because it's not, you don't eat for the reason that the apple is good looking, because it's tasty, it's nutrient, and it's safe. We need to really make this transition together, because your question has a very broad answer, because it depends biocontrol from biocontrol, even within the range of microorganisms. It depends if we're talking about inundative approach or inoculative approach. So that's why education of farmers is
Mr. in the back?
Yeah, thank you. So I have like two questions. The first one regarding the name of scientific community. We are allowed to name it as scientific community because in France, like, it's not really accepted to call it as scientific community. And the second question is like for the consortium. What is the minimum number of the consortium? Because if we have only 2 microorganisms, so we are not allowed to say consortium, it is like co-regulation. So how much is the minimum to call it as a consortium? It's not like co-regulation. Thank you.
So I start from the second question because the first half of the question I understood. On the consortia, you can, of course, have 2 microbes, and that is a consortium. Absolutely. There's a combination of strains, which it means only 2 strains make a combination. So you can have 2 microbes, either closely related or taxonomically, like fungus, and that's a consortium already. Then, of course, I would not make a consortium of 40 strains, otherwise it would be 2-3 decades to get the discussion done. But yeah. On the first question, I'm not quite sure I understood. Giving names to communities, you said, or
the name of scientific community.
Scientific community.
Scientific community. So are we allowed to name it as scientific community? Because it's not really the name. It's
on the consortium.
Yeah.
Well, we have been discussing that with experts. If you want to call them with the names of every microbe, the name would be very long. So, like, what happens for viruses is that they name the combination of different strains or isolates of viruses, they name after the disease they control. That's a good idea. But there's no regulation. I mean, the name is your code. I mean, for strains of single strains, of course, you name it after what is the cultural collection name. But for consortia, maybe you can call it after the name of the disease.
No, because when you are preparing to see, you have to meet the European requirement, but also in terms of France, we are not really allowed to make the bracket the scientific community. So it's not acceptable when you can prepare the dossier.
So maybe you should talk with the rapporteur and say France in this case in a presentation meeting and clarify this because it sounds quite strange. So.
2 questions in the back.
Yeah, I have one pretty more complicated. We are also investing. We as a seed company also investigating how crop rotations could protect our cash crop, let's call it, from diseases. And there's one concept where we have pre-crop, which in this case could be wheat. Treat the seeds to fight the pathogen that's evolving this wheat, but the actual interaction that we want to control is pathogen that coming off wheat and being a pathogen for the next crop, which could be potato or sugar. Question now that we are having this, and we apply it on wheat, but it's actually protecting sugar beet, we then have to register it wheat, or can we register it sugar beet? Yeah, because that's actually the interaction. And this is a very immediate but very important question because this is something that could actually help. But we already think about, okay, we cannot apply it, will never, the registration for wheat will never be a business case for us, right? But for sure it could be. It's a high value problem. You can make my life easier.
Will not last for long, then it will not find it next crop. But I need
No, so you're using the seed weed as a vector, basically. That's what you're saying, right? So the seed weed is a vector for your plant for active substance, a plant protection product to treat sugar beet.
No. So we are asking farmers to buy, let's say this could be a scenario. We ask farmers to take certain wheat, like wheat cereals, wheat, treated with certain seed treatment. So that would fight, let's say, nymphs in the soil. Yeah. And so that those nymphs don't propagate, don't evolve, and don't become don't become adults that then would infect our sugar beets in the next season. So we wanna come up with protection IPM strategies, crop rotation systems to have a sustainable agriculture, but we don't want to go for a registration for wheat, like wheat cereals, not seaweed, because that there's no business case for such a kind of very expensive treatment.
But the pest is affecting sugar beet.
Right,
Yeah.
or potato, whatever's coming next.
So that's based on the few words you told me now. You need to prove efficacy. Of course, then the crop to protect is sugar. So if you would claim that the crop to be protected is the wheat, then you would not see any efficacy there. Substance would never get approved. But this is a discussion issue that I cannot commit for that. I mean, that what it looks like.
You're right, but do you think one could approve a seed treatment in wheat that's supposed to protect the crop that's 6 months away or 9 months away from entering soil?
That's why I use the word vector. That's why I said you're basically using something, a seed, as a vector to inoculate your active substance in the soil for the succeeding crop.
Yeah.
So that's how I read what you're saying.
Okay.
But I don't know the area. We should discuss that in our parameters, but maybe use kind of this wording because that's what it looks like in percentage.
Thank you. So you think there's waste?
No, I don't say that. I say
About a solution actually for the farmers, would it be a possibility to facilitate products already tested in other countries and being registered in Europe or something like this? Because they already do the research in other countries. So facilitate those products that are already researched to join the or maybe being bought by companies here, something like this. Would it be possible?
well, we already say when we, because sometimes, especially for innovative biocontrolled substances, we meet many applicants who give us, suggestion apply. And we always recommend them, if they have already applied for the same substance somewhere else, like US, Brazil, we always recommend them to let the risk assessors know, know that sales under assessment there, or the sales submitted, that would facilitate eventually some. There's no provision in the regulation that tells if the substance is approved in the US, fast track review. No. Of course, but if the discussion was already ongoing somewhere with other assessors, so that facilitates for sure the discussion, but it's not like a black and white fast track procedure.
Very good. There is a comment in the chat telling that in addition to the photogenic reviews, the development of more consensus documents of OECD may speed up registration process. Now available only for a few species as bottlenecks. Thank you. So, and now there is a question in the chat to details. Is there any action to create a regulation for BPP or biological specifically for post-harvest use? These involve very different mode of action and condition compared to field application. There is more control to avoid release to the environment and elimination of residues for each consumer. Any chance a shorter pathway possible? Post-harvest business is much smaller, so companies have additional difficulties finding interesting. Still more and more disease to reach post-harvest stage because of the reduction of PPP authorized. So new solution needed. Thank you.
Yeah, well, there's no specific regulation for post-harvest treatment because everything goes under regulation level 7. What I would like to say, that's a perfect example of what I explained before when I mentioned a Rogan formulation document. And when I mentioned the introductory point 1.5 of the data requirement. So of course, if you are planning to submit your product in the post-harvest phase, you have like extremely good justification to waive a lot of data requirements, like on exposure of birds, like a lot of vehicles data. So we please have a look at the data requirements. So Regulation 23/2015, Regulation 24/2015, introductory point 1.5, and guidance document. Is a huge title I will never remember in my life, but there's a link in the presentation. So that helps a lot in waiving the requirements, but a specific basic act of that seems to be shooting flies with bazookas. So that can be simply solved by what we already.
Our speakers are welcome, are expected by board. Choose your point.
When we need the post-harvest treatment in warehouses for convenience or treaties, and farmers, it's a problem for farmers because we add a residue. And in the 4 lines protocols, we must consider the active substances we add in the warehouses. So it's a challenge.
No, no.
Thank you. I have some quick questions. One, Domenico, you have spoken about the lack of expertise, for example, at EFSA level. So I have a question, what are the main expertise that are required for the evaluation of populations? Can I do a second? A second is...
Wait.
Well, the problem, let's say, the pesticide environment is that that's an environment which was dominated by chemists. So the mindset, like somewhere, sometimes is gets similar, and that reflects also the way member states, not to mention necessarily EFSA, but in general, hire even people. So sometimes there are competent authorities from member states that are chemists, are hiring chemists, because many of the applications we receive are chemical substances. And that's a really chicken egg situation there, because we ask them, can you please hire more specialists, so biologists, microbiologists, ecologists, so life scientists? But they say, we cannot hire specialists because we don't receive application for microorganisms, for instance. And companies say, okay, but we don't go there to that member state because they don't have experts. So I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So if it's first the applicant that doesn't want to go to that member state because they're an expert, or is that member state not hiring expert because there are not applications? At EFSA level, they are doing a lot of progress there. They are now launching these things of a specific group of experts which are kind of ad hoc called for peer review of specific substances, especially in view of RNAi peptides. So whenever there will be a special case, they will kind of call other requests specific expert ad hoc for enforcing the technical.
Second one.
Okay, the second is about the experience of Geneva, because you represent companies which are applying for preparing the registration dossier. So what is in general the main bottleneck that is found during the registration process? Why we reach these 8 to 10 years sometimes for the registration?
The first is actually often a lack of resources and expertise. So as Domenico said, companies want to go somewhere where there's good expertise, but in the member states that have the best expertise, there's a queue of 2 or 3 years. So the first thing is you put your dossier in and nothing happens to 2 or 3 years. And not because anyone's trying not to, they just haven't got resources. So that's, and as a company, that's already 3 years where there's no payback. So then the authorities may well do things within the timescale originally set, maybe 4 years, or from start to finish, from picking up the dossier. So they come through the member states, and then it's come through EFSA, and then it's come back through the SCOPAF, and then one has one's active substance registration, but you've got that sort of delay at the beginning that everybody quietly ignores. But actually, as a company and someone who's got the investors asking for their money back, there's very real, those 2 to 3 years at the beginning. So then you've got maybe 4, so then you've got what, sort of 6, 7, and then you need to go to the member states and actually have your product authorized. So although it is meant to be a 120-day procedure, it does vary hugely. It can be 2 or 3 years, and it can be 100 days. So there again, you have a huge spectrum, and that's how you get to that rather vague figure on the graph that says 5 to 10 years, because it really does depend. And then in the middle of all that, you might have a question around your dossier that is maybe asking for extra information, and it may be that that's a valid request, or it may be that it's a lack of understanding, and that there has to be a lot of going back and forth about, well, actually, no, the product works like this, and then the person in the authority may or may not have the expertise to work on that, and then there's further discussions involving other people. So it's a combination of factors that make us arise at that issue. And inherently, though, it would be fair to say that because we've got at least 2 steps in the process to EFSA, then it's by its very nature going to take longer than some other jurisdictions because we've got multiple steps.
I have the last, very short, about the basic substances for Gianfranco. Are there microorganisms that can also go through this step of approval, or just natural substances in general?
Yogurt is something that needs, but not so successful. But they may. At now, no, there is no any dossier or any request for living gardens. They are basic substances, so they should be answered.
To do a comment from the perspective of a scientist. So I think the European Union is doing a very great job in funding all these projects for developing biocontrol agents, consortia, whatever. So they also fund a lot of exposure projects, human health, One Health projects. And I was involved in several of them, and very good results coming out of that in understanding the effect of the microbiome on plant health or what else. But then everything stopped. So, and this is due to this registration problem which we have. And I think it was from the beginning, it was a mistake to take it from the chemicals and then to the biologicals. And my feeling is also that the One Health approach is not considered at all. So it's really, it's not science-based anymore. I mean, as a scientist, I can handle. I know we don't have to know anything about the microbe. Then it can be maybe a fertilizer, because all the plant-associated microbes doing that, nurturing them, and or you don't have to understand the mechanisms and so on. But it's not science-based anymore, and this hurts a lot. This really hurts a lot, because to be honest, thinking on the health of my grandchildren and what I see now from this Exposure project, the chronic diseases are coming from missing microbes. And I mean, we could do a very good job in Europe if we really start from the scratch, rethinking health and handing over
especially our part of the world, to the children in a more healthy way, and not these. And then there's another law and another thing which add this, but it doesn't make it better. This is the problem. Of course, I mean, we can handle this, and it's also understandable that we want to regulate that, and I'm happy. But I mean, what are these effective microorganisms? No one in the room is talking about that, but they are selling it in tons all over Europe without any regulations for everything, from the toothpaste to the soil to the toilet. It's not regulated, so all close their eyes about that, and this is really dangerous. So, and it's not logic what is going on there, and I think we have really to enclose the results from these projects. I mean, it's also all these scientists, they are doing a fantastic job. I mean, we have these health exposome centers. They are studying the effect on human health, and we have so many great scientists, and they are never heard from the European Commission, or there is no connection, and we really have to change this.
Thank you.
You can say that this goes very well beyond the purpose of this conference, I guess, because it's really much horizontal. So I just can tell that we need to regulate the use of microbes in agriculture as pesticides, and whatever is in the other end, I'm not allowed to say. I mean, like, not in a position to say. It's I didn't quite understand what you mean that everything stopped. If you're talking about more fundings anymore, I know there are different products.
I mean, we develop products, for example.
So product development is not to be used on the private initiatives. Maybe Jennifer has an answer. I don't know. So you're talking about stopped what? Fundings from the EU or companies investing in developing products?
No, the translation stopped there, because these small companies which we have in Europe and which are normally involved in that book. So it's not the funding that stopped. It's, I mean, these projects, they are composed that they are these small startups, SMEs, and researchers together. So, and then we develop products, and then it stopped, because normally these small size companies, they don't have the 5 million for registering. So, and this is, I think, the problem.
Thank you for the comment. I think what we see is that for some small startups, then they would maybe seek some horizon funding, and then or whatever type of funding for the research, and then they look for investment money. And those that achieve the investment money often will start their investment in Europe, in the US rather than Europe, because it's quicker. Doesn't mean they won't come back to Europe, but it's really down to the duration of the registration pathway here, because as an investor, most of the agri-tech investors are looking for a return within 5 years. We can't deliver that, not with any certainty anymore. So it varies. Some come back to then register in Europe, some don't make it. But it's not all a function of registration timescale. Some of it's a function of the actual startup itself or their investment.
Yes, if I may add something maybe to Gali's remark. I think what you need to stop, the products don't reach the market. And that is what we discussed also in the session today, that a lot of products are invented and they don't reach the market, or not in a reasonable amount, not in the expected or desired amount the inventor had once they develop these kind of products. And from my point of view, the problem is not so much the data requirements in the European Union, not so much the level of standard, It's the problem of the structured registration process, as Jennifer described. And this is the big difference to US, not the data requirement, nothing else. It's in US, you go for one registration and then you have 50 member states and a reasonable market there. And this within 3 years. And that's the reason why companies go there. And in Europe, you have this multi-layer registration process. If you have the active registered, you are not on the market. It takes a lot of discussions, first for the registration of the active, to discuss with your rapporteur member state, to discuss with all the 26 other member states, and to discuss with EFSA. Then you have the active substance, if you're lucky. Then you go to the 3 zones, having a zonal rapporteur in each zone, discussing with 3 zonal rapporteurs and the member states of the zone again for the product. So this multi-layer process, but I'm with Domenico, I think member states will not let go of this. And that's the problem we have, not the European Union, the member states are the problem we are facing. And it's a political problem. I don't know how to solve this.
Sure. Yeah. So the thing of the return on investment, I understand, but we need to also clarify something. Those numbers, like the 5 to 10 years in Europe, first of all, are numbers that relates to old regulations. So the new regulation on mining, for instance, I think was November 2022. So we still need to see the accounting number, first of all. Second, that seems a bit of exaggeration of the most problematic cases. Just to give you examples, in the last 4 months, we've been approving 5 new biological active substances, all 5 microbes, which the dossier were submitted between 3 and 5 years ago. If they are low risk, if the member state respect the rules of 120% market, it means that we will have 5 new biological active substances on the market, plant protection product on the market, which the sale was submitted from 3 to 5 years. So that's good. But there are cases which things are going much better. So the problem is much more complex. And the comparison with other markets, what do we want? We're talking about food safety. What do we want? In Europe, we have high safety standards. We keep saying Brazil is fast. Yeah, that's true. Those are numbers. Brazil is fast. But Brazil approved also for PFAS, which in Europe has been completely banned for safety. So what do we want? We want product that faster to the market without taking care of consumer safety, or we want to use our. At the end of the day, we are just making our use of our safety standard, which were designed with level 7 by the council and the parliament. That's what we decided, right? So it's a complex situation. Is it possible to summarize in a few lines, or just by saying Brazil 1 year, EU 5 years? It's not only that; it's much more complex. What I can say is that with the regulatory elements we have now, especially with this new approach to targeted amendments, we have the tools to improve the situation if things are used wisely. But then the rest is we take another conference.
I would also like to make a spicy comment.
Yeah.
So we are talking about making the process of registration of microbials slimmer, let's say, kind of faster, but also safer. Would this also imply cutting the costs of the registration process? And what would be cut? Because in response to what you just said, the European Union has these principles which are much more preventive than other places. But then with all this really, really long process for risk assessment, we now have some trichodermas, which are also plant pathogenic, like commercialized strains of trichoderma, which became plant pathogenic, and also human pathogenic. So is it really worth doing all this risk assessment if then things can change in any case?
So the first question. So about the cost, of course, theoretically speaking, as case by case, cutting data requirements is also cutting cost. Also because with the new regulation, so the new data requirements of 2022, it was already in the regulation that animal testing should be as much as possible, even before. But with the new regulation, we weight of evidence approach, for instance, to address some endpoints like human pathogenicity. So before, the old regulation was relying too much on animal studies to prevent to understand, try to understand possible pathogenicity toward humans. But of course, with the latest development in science and the more confidence we are gaining by assessing microbes, we understand, okay, it's better to use more scientific literature, taxonomic indications, and other like WGS, instead of saying this microbe is not pathogenic to rats, so it's not pathogenic to humans. So that, why is COVID-19 for humans? The same condition is. So of course we are of course encouraging to use less costly methods also, which are not reliable. Animal models are not reliable as much as these so on. Or new genomic techniques or non-animal models, NAMs, methodologies as well. On your second question, what was that about? Sorry, trichoderma. Yeah, well, if you find out your microbe is pathogenic to humans, that's not going to change regulation because you cannot ever approve something that is pathogenic to humans. So if that was a question, of course, the regulation can change in the future, but it depends also when you plan to submit it. Because if a dossier is submitted, like if the data requirements won't be changed, micro again in the future. So the regulation level 7 will change residual aspects. So if you're worried about the data requirements on microbes, it depends also when you want to submit data requirement. But if you have something under development, we are also always open to meet applicants submission, if you have some questions at further stage of your development.
I just want to make a comment because a lot of times this happens. We hear pathogenic biologicals that become pathogenic, but it all comes to science. It all comes down to science. Everybody has to do a good study. You have to prepare your dossier according to taxonomic identification. You have to be careful what you are putting forward. And I think that the difficulty is that just for trichoderma, just for example, there are 426 species. Not all trichoderma are microbial beneficial for the plant. And this means that it makes it a lot of work in the studies. And I think that's what our responsibility is as scientists, is to get the facts straight. I just want to make a comment also to Gabrielle's comment about the microbials and the beneficials to society, One Health. I think the difficulty that here is what we're talking about is the registration process, the two-tier process, PPPs or biostimulants. But there is that area underneath the registration process because the products go on the market. There are products that go as soil integrators, as probiotics and everything, but how can we regulate this to ensure the safety of the consumer, the applicant? I mean, if you go and you put products in the environment, it doesn't mean they're natural products for sure, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be safe. I mean, we've seen that with a lot of other situations, but who is going to be able to help us that study these aspects, assist with the One Health? How can we, I mean, it's a Pandora's box, and I realize the difficulty that comes. I mean, you ask someone like Dominic that says, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, so do we put trichoderma in the environment? Do we take it out? I mean, it's there. And there's going to be always somebody that's going to take advantage of the fact that it has beneficial aspects. And just comment for Gianfranco.
Okay, wow.
I'd like to.
Thanks.
Sorry, I'd like to just.
No, during the treatments. So, thanks to all the panelists, thanks to all of you that interacted in the discussion. It was very useful. So, thank you again, and let's go forward.